In the months of June and July 2025, the United States carried out 4 chilling executions, each one marking the end of a long and controversial path through the justice system. From heartfelt apologies to eerie words of defiance, these prisoners faced death with final meals and last statements that still echo in public memory. Before we uncover the last moments of these men, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more deep dive true crime stories, last meal requests, and haunting final words. Tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stephen Christopher Stanko, South Carolina. Stephen Christopher Stanko's journey to death row was marked by violence, manipulation, and calculated brutality. His name first gained national attention in 2005 when a shocking double murder rocked the quiet community of Conway, South Carolina. But what made the case even more chilling was the man behind the crimes, a charming ex-convict who had previously authored a book from prison and deceived many into believing he had turned his life around. In April 2005, just months after being released from a previous prison sentence for kidnapping and assault, Stephen Stanko committed 2 brutal murders within the span of a single night. He was living with 43-year-old Laura Ling, a local librarian, and her teenage daughter, when he strangled and slit Laura's throat inside their shared home. But his rampage didn't stop there. Stanko then drove to the nearby home of 74-year-old librarian Henry Turner, a man he had befriended. There, he shot Turner execution style and fled in his car. Law enforcement quickly pieced the events together, and a statewide manhunt began. His face was plastered across media outlets as the public was warned he was armed and dangerous. After several days on the run, Stanko was captured in Augusta, Georgia. Authorities found him dining in a Barnes & Noble cafe, reading a copy of The Historian, and acting as if nothing had happened. In court, prosecutors detailed the methodical nature of the murders. They emphasized Stanko's manipulation skills, his deceptive charm, and his capacity for calculated violence. The jury needed little convincing. He was sentenced to death in 2006 for the murder of Laura Ling and later received a second death sentence for the murder of Henry Turner. After nearly 2 decades on death row, Stephen Stanko was executed by lethal injection at the Broad River Capital Punishment Facility in Columbia, South Carolina on June 13, 2025, at 6:13 p.m. Witnesses described the execution chamber as quiet and intensely solemn. There were no delays or complications. As the chemicals were administered, Stanko showed no signs of resistance or distress, passing away within minutes. This marked the first execution carried out in South Carolina in several years, due in part to ongoing legal debates over the state's methods of execution. While South Carolina law allows prisoners to choose between the electric chair and firing squad, Stanko did not contest the use of lethal injection. Last meal. In his final hours, Stanko chose a meal that many described as a Southern comfort banquet, a symbolic farewell to the region he had lived in and ultimately betrayed. His final meal included fried fish, shrimp, crab cakes, a baked potato, carrots, fried okra, cherry pie, banana pudding, sweet tea. Prison officials confirmed that he ate the full meal without comment and declined further requests to speak with clergy or legal representatives. Last words moments before the execution began, Stanko delivered a calm, carefully worded 3-minute statement. His voice did not tremble. He appeared reflective, even composed. Speaking directly to the families of his victims and those present in the witness room, he said, "To the families, I offer no excuses. Nothing I say can take back the pain I've caused. I ask only for your forgiveness, not for me, but for your own peace. Please don't remember me only for that night. I was not that man before, and I haven't been that man since." He paused for several seconds before concluding, "Let healing come from here. Let it start with letting go." He did not mention God or religion. He made no claims of innocence. There were no cries, no final outbursts, just a chilling, almost clinical acknowledgement of the crimes he had committed and the fate he was about to meet. As the injection began, Stanko looked toward the glass and gave a slight nod. No further words were spoken. He was pronounced dead shortly after. In the days following the execution, both the Ling and Turner families released brief statements thanking the state for seeing justice through. However, both acknowledged that closure remained elusive. Laura Ling's brother stated, "This doesn't bring Laura back, but at least we know he won't hurt anyone else." Stephen Stanko's case continues to be studied in criminal justice and forensic psychology circles for its disturbing intersection of narcissism, manipulation, and violence. His ability to mask his predatory nature behind intelligence and charisma serves as a grim reminder. Not all monsters look the part. His final words, calculated and self-aware, offered no comfort, no redemption. Just a final performance from a man who had spent his life wearing many masks. Richard Gerald Jordan, Mississippi. Richard Gerald Jordan's name has long been etched into the history of Mississippi's criminal justice system, not because of the nature of his crime alone, but because of the sheer length of time he spent on death row. His execution in June 2025 marked the end of one of the longest-running death penalty cases in American history, nearly 47 years after his conviction. In 1976, Richard Jordan was a 29-year-old military veteran when he accepted $1,000 to carry out a murder for hire. The victim, Edwina Marta, was the wife of a wealthy Gulf Coast businessman. Her husband, in a desperate attempt to gain access to her life insurance, arranged for her to be killed. Jordan accepted the deal, kidnapped Edwina, and took her to a wooded area near Biloxi, Mississippi. There, he executed her with a single gunshot to the back of the head. The case shocked the region. The cold, transactional nature of the killing, combined with the calculated planning, left both the community and law enforcement stunned. Jordan was swiftly arrested after being linked to the murder through confessions and evidence. In 1977, he was sentenced to death, but what followed would become a legal saga stretching nearly 5 decades, riddled with overturned sentences, appeals, resentencing hearings, and even debates over whether the state had violated Jordan's rights by changing his plea agreement terms. At various points, his sentence was changed from death to life imprisonment and back again. By the time of his execution, Jordan was 72 years old, nearly blind, and had outlived his original prosecutor, trial judge, and many others connected to the case. His legal journey became a symbol, for some, of the flaws and slowness of the capital punishment system, for others, of a man who never showed sufficient remorse for the pain he caused. On the evening of June 25, 2025, Jordan was executed by lethal injection at the Mississippi State Penitentiary, also known as Parchman Farm. Witnesses described the atmosphere as eerily quiet, as if the sheer duration of the case had weighed everyone down with exhaustion. There were no legal obstacles left. The U.S. Supreme Court had denied his final appeal earlier that month. Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves declined to grant clemency, citing the gravity of the original crime and the decades of judicial due process that had preceded the execution. Prison officials reported that the procedure went according to protocol. The chemicals took effect within minutes, and Jordan was pronounced dead at 6:08 p.m. Last meal. Despite being the longest-serving prisoner on Mississippi's death row, Richard Jordan requested a surprisingly humble final meal, nothing extravagant or symbolic. Chicken tenders, French fries, strawberry ice cream, a root beer float. There was something almost childlike about the menu. It wasn't gourmet, but it reflected a quiet simplicity, perhaps a deliberate choice after 47 years of institutional food and sensory deprivation. Prison officials confirmed he ate the meal without any specific comments or requests. Final words. As he lay strapped to the gurney, Jordan used his final moments to deliver a brief and respectful statement. His voice was low but steady, and he showed no visible emotion. He began by addressing the family of Edwina Marta. "I want to apologize to the victim's family. I know it's been a long road, and I am sorry for the pain I caused. I've had a long time to think about what I did." He then turned his words to those who had supported him through the years. "To my wife, thank you for standing by me. To my legal team, I am grateful for your efforts and compassion. I will see you on the other side, all of you." There was a moment of silence. He did not plead innocence, did not cry, and made no dramatic declarations. His tone was neither bitter nor self-righteous, just quiet acceptance. His final words echoed in the still chamber as the chemicals took hold. Richard Jordan's execution reignited conversations about the efficiency, ethics, and cost of America's death penalty system. Supporters of capital punishment argued that justice had finally been served, albeit belatedly. Critics pointed to the fact that it took nearly half a century and untold millions of taxpayer dollars to reach the final act. For the victim's surviving relatives, the execution brought a mix of relief and grief. Edwina Marta's niece told local media, "We waited almost 50 years for this. It doesn't bring her back, but at least now there's an end to it." Some advocates for reform noted that Jordan had become a symbol of the inertia of death row, where inmates age into their senior years before executions occur. At 72, Jordan was among the oldest people executed in U.S. history. His execution also highlighted the limits of remorse, how even decades of reflection and aging don't erase the consequences of one horrific decision. Michael Bernard Bell, Florida. Michael Bernard Bell's case is a grim testament to both the persistence of justice and the dark legacy of cold case crimes. For over 2 decades, Bell evaded punishment for one of the most horrific double murders in Florida's modern history, the brutal slaying of a young mother and her 5-year-old daughter. His final day came more than 30 years later, on July 15, 2025, when the state of Florida carried out his execution by lethal injection. The murders took place in 1993 in the city of Tallahassee. Bell, then a 25-year-old with a criminal record and a reputation for violence, broke into the home of Felicia Owens, a 29-year-old single mother, and her daughter, Talia Owens, a kindergartner just beginning her life. Prosecutors described the crime scene as one of the most disturbing they had ever encountered. Felicia had been sexually assaulted and strangled, while little Talia had also been murdered, likely because she witnessed the attack. No immediate arrests were made, and Bell, already a known offender, managed to avoid suspicion due to a lack of direct evidence. For years, the case went cold. But in 2017, advances in DNA testing reopened the investigation. Semen recovered from the crime scene, preserved for over 2 decades, was tested using modern genetic profiling techniques. The results were conclusive. Michael Bernard Bell was the perpetrator. He was arrested in 2018, tried in 2020, and sentenced to death in 2021. During the trial, prosecutors painted him as a man with no regard for human life. Bell never confessed, and at no point did he express remorse for the crime. Defense attorneys attempted to argue for mental illness and childhood trauma, but the jury was unmoved. The overwhelming forensic evidence sealed his fate. Bell's execution took place at Florida State Prison in Rayford on the evening of July 15, 2025, shortly after 6 p.m. The execution was carried out by lethal injection, the primary method used by the state of Florida. Despite being given the opportunity to challenge the method of execution, Bell made no last-minute legal attempts to halt the proceedings. Witnesses noted that he entered the execution chamber calmly and did not resist any part of the process. He was strapped to the gurney as prison officials administered the lethal drugs. The entire process, from the beginning of the injection to the time of death, lasted approximately 14 minutes. Bell was pronounced dead at 6:14 p.m. Bell's last meal was not publicly disclosed by the Florida Department of Corrections. There were no media reports of any special requests, leading many to believe that he either declined a last meal or chose to eat the standard institutional tray served to inmates evening. Unlike other high-profile inmates who request extravagant or symbolic meals, Bell chose silence. No statements were made about his preferences, and officials honored his right to privacy on the matter. Final words. If observers expected a moment of remorse or a last-minute apology, they were left cold. Michael Bernard Bell did not apologize to the Owens family, nor did he acknowledge the brutal murders that had brought him to that chamber. Instead, his final words were directed not at the victims, but at the staff carrying out his execution. With a chilling detachment, he said, "Thank you for ending my life peacefully. I'm glad I don't have to rot in a cell anymore." There was no mention of God, no request for forgiveness, no recognition of Felicia or Talia Owens. Just a cold, almost relieved acknowledgement of his fate. Witnesses, including members of the victim's family, watched in silence. One relative of Felicia Owens later told reporters, "He didn't even say her name. That says everything." The execution of Michael Bernard Bell drew both media attention and public debate, particularly due to the nature of the victims and the length of time between the crime and the conviction. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis released a brief statement affirming the execution as part of his administration's commitment to capital punishment for heinous crimes. "Justice delayed is not justice denied," he wrote. Felicia and Talia's lives mattered. In contrast, civil rights groups raised concerns about the broader use of the death penalty, noting that Bell's case, though monstrous, highlighted issues of evidence preservation, systemic delays, and the slow speed of resolution in cold cases. Still, for the Owens family, the moment brought a sense of finality. Felicia's sister stood outside the prison and told reporters, "We waited 32 years for this. My sister and my niece didn't get last words. He didn't deserve his." Edward J. Zakrzewski II, Florida. The name Edward J. Zakrzewski II is forever associated with one of Florida's most cold-blooded and disturbing family murder cases. More than 3 decades after he slaughtered his entire family, Zakrzewski was executed on July 31, 2025, bringing to an end a case that had long haunted the state and the nation. On May 2, 1994, 33-year-old Edward Zakrzewski returned home to his family's modest house in Gulf Breeze, Florida, and carried out a premeditated triple murder that shocked the country. He first bludgeoned and stabbed his wife Sylvia, 29, to death in their bedroom using a metal pipe and kitchen knife. Then, in what prosecutors described as a horrifyingly calculated move, he entered the room of his 2 young sons, Edward Jr., age 7, and Jonathan, age 5, and slit their throats while they slept. But the horror did not end there. After the killings, Zakrzewski attempted to cover up the crime by washing his sons' bodies in the bathtub, dressing them in clean pajamas, and placing them neatly in their beds. He left the house, fled to Hawaii, and began a new life, at first pretending nothing had happened. For days, no one knew anything was wrong. It wasn't until Sylvia's family grew concerned and reported her missing that authorities discovered the grisly scene. When investigators caught up with Zakrzewski in Honolulu just weeks later, he confessed in chilling detail. He claimed his marriage had deteriorated, and he didn't want to deal with a divorce or child custody issues. In his mind, murder was cleaner than separation. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death in 1996, making him one of the longest-serving inmates on Florida's death row by the time of his execution. After nearly 29 years on death row, Edward Zakrzewski was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Rayford on July 31, 2025 at 6:02 p.m. The execution took place under the administration of Governor Ron DeSantis, who had overseen a record number of executions in 2025. There were no appeals in the final week of his life. Zakrzewski did not request clemency. He did not contest the method of execution. By all appearances, he was ready to die. Witnesses described the execution chamber as tense. The families of Sylvia and the 2 children sat behind the glass with solemn faces, bracing for the final moments of a man who had destroyed their lives decades earlier. As the needle was inserted and the fatal drugs began to flow, Zakrzewski remained eerily calm. Florida officials did not release the details of Zakrzewski's last meal, and there was no public record of any special request. It remains unclear whether he declined a final meal or whether his selection was kept confidential at his request. Unlike other death row inmates who used their final meal to make a statement, either through excess, symbolism, or simplicity, Zakrzewski left nothing behind on this front. The silence was chilling. Final words. Though silent on his meal, Zakrzewski chose to speak before his death. He was given the opportunity to make a final statement, and he took it. What followed was a cold, articulate, and composed monologue that shocked many of those in the room. His words, delivered with no emotion, were as follows. "I want to thank the good people of the Sunshine State for killing me in the most cold and calculated, clean, humane, and efficient way possible. I have no complaints whatsoever." He made no apology to the surviving members of Sylvia's family. He did not mention his wife or children by name. He did not explain why he did it, nor express regret for the act. Instead, he ended his life with an unnerving display of stoicism, even quoting a portion of Robert Frost's poem, "Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening." The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. These were his final words. The drugs continued their course. Within minutes, he was dead. Zakrzewski's final statement set off a firestorm of discussion in the media and online. Some called it philosophically detached, others labeled it sociopathic performance art, but few denied its chilling power. Critics of the death penalty pointed out that his lack of remorse and poetic farewell only underscored the brutality of the justice system, a system in which a man who murdered 2 children could die on his own terms, decades later, with a literary quote on his lips. Supporters of the execution argued the opposite, that his emotionless final words were proof that he deserved no mercy, and that justice, while slow, had finally been delivered. The family of Sylwia Zakrzewski declined interviews after the execution, issuing a short statement. There is nothing he could say that would undo what he did. We've waited 31 years for this moment. It is finished. The executions carried out in June and July 2025 remind us of the haunting rituals of death row, from the final meal to the prisoner's last breath. Some sought redemption, others offered no apology. In either case, these moments serve as a sobering reflection on justice, punishment, and the last words that linger. If you found this breakdown compelling, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. And don't forget to share this video with other true crime enthusiasts. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more stories from death row, unsolved cases, and the darkest corners of American justice.